Hi, this is Scott, Kilo Sierra 6 Delta Alpha Yankee, and for today's video, I'm here with a review of the Wouxun KG-UV9P. Now, if you're saying to yourself, hey, didn't I see this video a few months back? Yeah, you did, but there's a story to that. It's the only review that I've actually pulled down. And the reason for that, I'll cover that real quick, just so you know, and there's no shenanigans, and I don't have to cover this in the comments section. I did a review on this radio, and it was in conjunction with a couple of radios that I was looking at the time. And what happened was I received the KG-UV9P at exactly the same time I received the KG-935 Golf. I will readily admit that of the two radios, this is the one that captured my attention, and I spent a lot of time and did a lot of content on the KG-935 Golf. While in the interim, the KG-UV9P just didn't really capture my attention for a number of reasons. But one day I was going through some content ideas, and I say I haven't talked about the Wouxun KG-UV9P. Let me get that done real quick for anyone interested in that. And in all honesty, it was a half-hearted review. It was subpar as far as work goes. I'm the biggest critic of my own work, to be honest. And when it came to the video review that I did on this, I hadn't really spent an adequate enough time with the radio, and I was just kind of running through things. And I'm going to be honest with you, it's the same mistake that a lot of YouTube channels eventually make. At least that's what I'm discovering. You get to a certain point, and you get a backlog of material, so you start busting through it real quick. The second you do that, the sincerity level, the authenticity, all of it drops off. For a reason. It's not there. And I honestly had not given this radio a fair shake. And what had happened was, one thing Wouxun doesn't do a very good job of is really tout some of the better features of this radio. And one of the features that they don't even talk about at all in any of the literature is the fact that this has a super heterodyne receiver, which is kind of a big thing for a Chinese radio. So my assumption was, because I knew that the 935 Golf had a direct conversion receiver, I assumed, and this assumption bit me in the ass, I assumed this one did too. So I put this review out and I covered the features, and I did an adequate enough job at talking about the features of the radio and what I thought about it with very little experience with the radio. And then in there, oh yeah, it's got direct conversion receiver, and it didn't. And someone called me on it, and I went, oh, hang on just a second. So I held the review, and then I started looking at this radio a little closer, because all of a sudden I did start actually legitimately paying attention to the features on this thing. I said, well, let me give this thing a fair shake. So sometimes if I'm trying to really understand a radio, particularly if I have a negative take on a radio and others have a positive take, I figure at some point I must be wrong about what I'm doing here, and I'll stop and go back and spend some time with the radio. The FT3DR by Yaesu is one that I do that about every 6 months. I'll stop and spend another 2 or 3 weeks with the radio, and then walk away with the same conclusions I walk away with every time. It's an overcomplicated, poorly designed radio. And thus, I haven't done a review on it, because I kind of don't like talking about crap radios. It kind of hurts my spirit a little bit. But in this case, I spent some time with the Wouxun. And guess what happened? The damn thing won me over as equally as the 935 Golf. I really started playing with this thing, and consequently, and I talk all the time about my top 5 or top 7 or whatever. It's the radios that sort of sit to the front of my row of radios. Well, not only has this thing moved up into that row, but actually this thing rides to work with me every day. It's become my new EDC radio. This is the one that goes on my IMCOM bag and goes to work with me every single day. I mess with it a lot. It's the one that I actually will use for checking in on nets if I'm just messing around at the house. In fact, it went to my grandson's last t-ball game last night. They were concluding the season, and this is the radio that was with me. It's getting some road rash and some road wear, and you'll notice we are in close-up mode, because that seems to be the preferred mode of operations for radio reviews. Right here, I got a nice little nick that's taken out of the corner of the case. The antenna's got a wee bit of a bend to it. It's got some marks, dings, and scratches, and the reason why is this damn thing is getting used constantly. So that's why I'm kind of thrilled about actually doing this review, because I'm here to tell you about a really cool little radio. And it falls right in that $149, $150 mark. Or I should just have 150, but about 150 bucks is where radios start getting interesting, and they start getting consistently good. With the cheaper radios like the Baofangs in the $30 to $50 range, it's a crapshoot, and I admit that. The UV9 Pro video that I did just recently, right away had a few people jump in the comments and say, "Hey, I bought one and it sucked." And I did mention in the review, I didn't know if I got if it was a particularly good radio or I just got a particularly good example. But with those inexpensive radios, it is a crapshoot whether or not you're going to get a good one or a bad one. But I'm going to tell you, when it comes to Wouxun, I haven't gotten a bad one yet, and somewhere around here, I can't quite reach it just yet, but there's an XS20 Golf that's the mobile equivalent of the 935 Golf. I owe you a review on that, and I have a couple more Wouxuns coming, because what I'm finding is that Wouxun as a brand is pretty badass. I made the mistake years ago, and I know I'm going along with this intro to this review, but bear with me, because I want to talk for just a moment, and I did this in the other review on this radio, but I want to talk about Wouxun as a brand, because I made a huge mistake years ago. I assumed Wouxun were basically just another Baofeng, another Redivus, another TYT, and that is an inexpensive Chinese radio, and that they were just kind of okay, but I thought they were a little overpriced for being kind of okay, cheap Chinese radios. Boy, was I ever wrong. Wouxun, they make good gear. They make good radios. Yes, there are some flaws, and nothing's perfect, and I still, no matter what brand it is, I still haven't found my perfect radio. But boy, does this one tick a lot of boxes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the review on this radio, and we'll talk about what it is. But I guess the upshot is this has sort of changed the way in which I do reviews on radios. You'll note that the pace in terms of the reviews that I'm releasing, there's longer gaps between them. It's because I'm genuinely spending time with the radios. I don't want to be that guy that just gets someone sending me a radio in a box. I take it out, look at it, read the manual, turn it on, punch a couple frequencies in, and declare it thumbs up or thumbs down. I'd rather you actually use the thing before I talk about it. So yeah, I do review radios that have been out for many years. I do review radio. I don't go for that, the clicks to be the first one to review the latest thing that hit the market. I want to see if it's actually any good by actually using it. And I can tell you with this Wouxun, I guess I'm skipping forward to the end. Here's your quick review if you want to dump out early. Thumbs up, buy it. But let me get into the actual features now. I mentioned earlier that this would cover several different model numbers. This is a KG-UV9 Papa, and I bought it from Buy Two Way Radios. And the UV9 Papa, I don't know if it's proprietary to that particular vendor or not, but it's basically a UV9 Delta with some additional programming, which I did not avail myself of. First thing I did was go in and save the factory file, then blank everything out, and then put my own stuff in. I do that every time, so I didn't achieve a benefit from that, but everything does kind of carry over between the Delta and the Papa, and then of course the Papa X-Ray is just both of those with just a dark color display. But what we're talking about here is a dual band analog HT. It's designed to transmit in the 104, the VHF and UHF bands, and that would be 144 to 148 megahertz for VHF and 420 to 450 megahertz for UHF. On receive, this is where things get kind of wild, because this goes to that super heterodyne receiver, by the way, which it does have a super heterodyne receiver. So we're talking about now being competition for things like the Yaesu FT60 and other decent analog radios that are sort of in that same $150 range. But here's your receive bands: 78 to 108 megahertz, which is FM radio. Nothing terribly special there. But for a lot of you, this one will perk you up. How about 108 to 136 megahertz AM air band? A lot of guys like to listen to that air band. Then we've got, of course, on receive for 2 meter, we have 136 to 180 megahertz. And then it'll also receive 230 to 250 megahertz, which is 1.25 meter. 350 to 400 megahertz, which is TV, etc. some weird stuff in there. And then, of course, 400 to 512 megahertz for UHF. And then also 700 to 985 megahertz in the public safety realm. So you have a lot of reception capabilities with this radio that other Chinese radios are not going to afford you. This thing, and do keep in mind, transmitting is actually a small equation of amateur radio. Reception is very, very important, because you're going to want to hear those signals so that you know to whether reply to them or, you know, gather intel, gather information, what have you. This is an excellent radio for that purpose. So again, super heterodyne receiver. It has 999 memory channels, which is a decent amount, so we're doing good. Now, allocating those memory channels into banks, such as with the Yaesu or Yaesu radios, or into zones, like some of the TYT radios, Anytone radios, etc. We don't really have that, but we kind of have that. What you can do is, rather than allocate everything into banks, it does afford you to use up to 2 scan groups. So you can allocate channels in 100 channel blocks, and you can set those up as scan groups, and then you can do a proprietary scan of that. It's not ideal, and that's one of the things I don't particularly care about on this radio. I do like banks, I do like zones, I do like being able to allocate memory channels, but I also have found that as a local radio for me, those 2 scan groups are really all I need. On one of them I have my talkie-talkie stuff, and on the other I have my public safety. Good to go. So I'm not too terribly bothered by that. So now let's talk about output power, because this is where this radio, this is another thing that just blew me away that I didn't know about this radio, was the output power on this is kind of amazing. Now, I'm going to give you my tested figures, and I am going to do an actual output power test so I can show you this, and you know that what I'm telling you is you know, for real. Low power, VHF, UHF, of course, 1 watt. Medium power is 5 watts. Medium power is 5 watts. That's high power for most radios, and that's for real, by the way. It's actually 4 watts UHF, 5 watts VHF. High power, this thing consistently does 8 watts on VHF, consistently, and 7 watts on UHF. And that's verified, and that is damn consistent. So nothing short of amazing there. The factory supplied antenna is actually not half bad, but I'm going to talk about antennas for this later as well. But that's some pretty impressive statistics so far for a radio that retails for $149.99 from buy2wayradios.com. Country of origin, of course, is China. I think we've guessed that one already. Let me talk real quick about weather resistance before we get into the actual physical features of the radio. But weather resistance, as you know, is a very important evaluation criteria for me. If you're going to use a radio for emergency communications, that radio needs to be weather resistant, it needs to be rugged, it needs to be durable. Now, there's no mil standard shock rating on this like some radios have, but it is a fairly robust design. But in terms of weather resistance, we're IP55, which is dust resistant, and it will withstand direct water jets. So this thing is okay to take out and play in the rain. And that kind of became a thing, actually, during the recent floods here in my area. This thing actually got some use. I'll talk about that in a separate video. But let's go on to, let me do a little scroll down here real quick, and I need to get to my next page. I'm actually, believe it or not, using notes. That's been a criticism that I have listened to. I tend to jump around a lot, so I've actually set up a system for evaluating these things. So let's talk about the physical characteristics of the radio itself. Starting at the top of the radio from the on-off and volume control knob. I like separate volume and channel control knobs on the top of the radio, and this one has it. Of course, you turn the knob to turn the radio on, and that, of course, also controls your volume. The volume of which is actually not half bad at all. It's loud, but it's a little on the thin side. But it's more than adequate for your needs. And, of course, we do have our channel control knob. Now, the band that I'm messing with is the lower band here. I can move up here and just use that to switch between my my channels, so no problem there. Pretty conventional. I'm going to go ahead and turn this off so I don't accidentally transmit. Now, the antenna is SMA female. Now, this is another thing that I absolutely love. I like the conductor pin on my radios to be on the antenna side and not on the radio side. That way, if that pin gets damaged, I can get the radio operational with the replacement of an antenna. It's going to be a pretty cheap proposition versus having this piece go bad and having to send it back and have a new one put on the board. So that's my preferred method. This is what you commonly see in the higher end radios that come from Yaesu, ICOM, etc. The antenna itself is advertised as a high gain antenna. We'll talk about this when we get to the actual antenna testing. As a factory antenna, though, I will tell you it's not half bad. But there is a better antenna out there that really brings this thing alive. So more on that later. Moving to the side of the radio, we have 4 knobs or 4 buttons on the side of the radio. This one is obvious. It's our PTT. The PTT button is not hinged at the top or the bottom. It's a straight press in. There's no dead spots on the PTT, but I will tell you this. It's very sensitive. You can just give it a little bit of a touch, and you're going to get some action off of that, which is... I haven't run into a problem with it in a pouch yet. I was a little worried about that. That's actually not a problem, but I have had every now and again I'll be handling it and I can make it go off, but it seems to be just when I press at the bottom. So I'm going to have to test that a little bit more and see if maybe it's something I'm doing or whatnot, but it's not that big a deal. It's just a minor little criticism. Now the buttons here, we have what's called PF1, PF2, and PF3. And these are programmable buttons. Now I'll give you the defaults for that. PF1, which is the top button, comes by default as transmit on subband. And that's just simply another way. And I'll actually have to show you the demo on that. I don't really care for it. It actually turns it kind of into another PTT button. But you can set this up for either no options at all, or you can just make it dead. You can do selective call, alarm, SOS, or again, a text on subband. Moving down to PF2, the default on this is your keyboard light, but it can be set up with a short press for FM radio on off. And then for your long press options, you can set it up for scanning, timer, light, or lamp rather, shift, and keyboard light. Moving down to PF3, this by default is set up as alarm. But you can also set it up on a short press for as a Monty button and as a long press, again, selective call, alarm, SOS, or text on subband. So I am going to do a deeper dive later on setting this radio up, and I'm even going to do an operator series on this. So we'll cover those button functions later. It's not... For the purposes of a review, it's not that terribly important to drill too deep down into that, but I just wanted to let you know you got a PTT and you have 3 programmable buttons on the side that can be used for a number of different interesting things. Now moving to the front of the radio, let's go ahead and turn it on. The lighting here is going to be a little... This isn't going to come across, and I'm trying to look here and see if I can check a monitor. It is not as bad as it looks. The lights that I'm using to illuminate the radio for purposes of filming this really wash the screen out, but so does daytime. It's a white screen with blue text. It's viewable. I can see everything on the screen right now, but I will say it's dim. And if there's one criticism I could levy against this radio, is that the display kind of sucks. For outdoor use, it also drops out at too short an interval for me. I guess I could set it to constant on, and let me see if I can. Okay, we're back. I started to fiddle around with looking for the lamp here, and I got off on a little wild goose chase. So we're gonna just do the magic of editing. We're just gonna cut that part out and put it all back together. But let's get back to talking about the display. So the display is white with blue lettering, and it's not, of course, as bright as I would like it to be. And it's not necessarily that big a problem at night or indoors, no problem whatsoever. During the day, really washes out. But I'll be completely honest with you, just about every HT I use during the day, the display washes out, and you're going to find yourself having to cup a hand over to see what you got going on. So it's a minor hit, but it's not that bad. But here's the good news. There is a model currently out called the KG-UV9PX, or Papa X-Ray. And that features the same dark display that you find on the KG-935 Golf, which I happen to like. Unfortunately, there's no way to upgrade a current UV9 Delta or UV9 Papa to that display, but the next one I buy certainly will be a PX version with that darker display. So moving on to the rest of the front panel here. This, like a couple of the other Oceans that I currently have, features something that I just get tickled by every time I use it. So this is a dual watch, dual receive radio. Now it's not in the sense that it's not a duplex type radio that you work satellites with. What I'm saying there is, if you're monitoring whatever, if you have these two bands displayed, whatever traffic comes in will be picked up and actually come through the speaker so that you can hear it. So, for instance, if something occurs on TCRC1, for instance, so we have some traffic there, you'll see a little phone that'll be flashing, and that lets me know that the last station that was active was that particular line, which is kind of nice, because if you hear some traffic and you don't know if is that TCRC1 or TCRCG1, looking at that little phone will let you know which one it was. But of course, if anything happened on TCRCG1, it would actually you'd hear the audio on that as well. Now, if that starts to stack up and you have both of these lines are active, you get this repeater rocking and that repeater rocking, and you can't keep track of what's going on, the cool thing about that is you can use the TDR button, which I love the TDR button. A short press of this button right here, which serves two purposes, short press TDR, long press is VFO or memory. Just simply pressing that eliminates that sub band, and it's only going to receive and transmit from the main band. Now, if I want those bands back, and you'll notice main is illuminated, so if I press the PTT, that is the band that I'll be talking on. But if something comes in on TCRC G1, I'll hear that as well. But if I want to drop down and communicate on TCRC G1, I just press the band. That'll toggle down that, you'll see that main now drops down into the subband. If I press the PTT, I'll be talking from there. So it's a very efficient, and of course I can press the TDR and drop out the top line if I wanted to. Move back to the top, press TDR, drop out the bottom line. It's a very efficient way of switching back and forth from dual watch, dual receive without having to go into the menu and do it. So it's an excellent system. It's an excellent layout. I hope they continue with this. And I did notice that, for instance, the Anytone ATD878UV also does this. It's not as clear. You have to program a button to do that, but it'll do the same thing. But I do really like that particular setup. It works very well for me. Of course, getting into the menu is pretty simple. Just a short press of the menu button, and I can go through all of my menu selections. As you found earlier, I'm still a little light on knowing exactly where everything is in the menu. So, but it should be pretty familiar with you if you've dealt with these kind of menus before. Everything you need is here. And of course, I'll show you later in an operator series video how to execute some of the changes that you need to do on the radio, how to program repeaters, etc. So hit the exit button to escape out of there. Rest of the PTT, of course, we have our keys, and we have our secondary functions on the keys for long presses, etc. And that's kind of about it. Microphone, your microphone port is clearly indicated here. It's actually shielded to a certain degree, and it's in an okay spot. Something I'll caution you about: if you have big hands and you like to hold the radio like this, it's pretty easy for me to thumb the PTT and actually have my finger over the mic port. So that's why you want to identify where that is on your HT, so that you don't do that. Now, I tend just by default to keep my fingers off of the front panel while I'm transmitting at all, but that is something that could easily occur, so make sure you know where that's at. Now, moving to this side of the radio, or the other side of the radio, we have our speaker mic port here, and this is also our port for programming. And this is going to be, and the good news is, or maybe bad news, depends, this uses a K-plug. So speaker mics that are commonly associated with other Chinese radios like Baofangs and Redivises, those speaker mics will work here. Here's another interesting thing: programming cables. If you already have a functioning Baofang programming cable, don't buy a programming cable for this. I program this through Chirp, and it is fully Chirp supported, utilizing my Baofang programming cable. So that's kind of a nice little money saver there for you. I'll go ahead and turn this off. Now moving to the back of the radio, we'll look at the battery and of course our belt clip. Belt clip is well designed, very well made. It's got a very, very solid mechanism. Good pin going through that's staked on the other side. It's got a robust feel to it, so as belt clips go, not a bad belt clip. The radio itself, we have our battery latches, 2 at the side here, which is not too bad. I find a lot of times, unless it's a positive physical battery latch like in an FT60, the little battery latches at the bottom that just have a tiny little clip can be a little fragile, and particularly if you drop the radio on its bottom, you can get a release of the battery. This one, you just press the 2 buttons in on each side and just slide it out. And of course, we can see all the goodies on the inside. We got our FCC compliance sticker here, so we're good to go there. And for the battery itself, 3200 milliamp battery. Now, this one was an interesting thing for me. And of course, the belt clip is attached to the battery. There's some that do not like that. I happen to like that because I will have, for radios that I use a lot, I'll have 2 versions. I have one battery that has no clip on it, and I have a battery that has a clip on it. The battery with the clip on it tends to be my casual around the house battery, and the one without the clip is the battery that goes on the radio when it goes into my Spectre gear pouch that's either going to be on my belt or on my plate carrier. So, and of course we do offer, or my pack rather, and we do offer radio pouches for this radio, as well as several other Ocean radios. But this I tend to use for IMCOM purposes. I use my radios in a pouch. I don't trust a belt clip because although this is a well-designed belt clip, I don't trust belt clips because I've had radios fall off one too many times. So, but getting back to the battery real quick. When I did the first review on this, I had only charged and used this battery once maybe. And one thing that, actually twice, because one thing I noted was this thing really went through the battery pretty quick. And then it stopped doing that. And this is one that I haven't had. I've never had that happen with an HT battery before. But the first couple of times that I charged and used the radio, or used the battery in the radio, I mean, it seemed like it just went faster than it should have. It certainly didn't last as long as my 935 Golf, to the point to where I thought I actually had maybe a defective battery, because other people were not reporting the same condition. But the more I used it, the longer the battery would retain its charge. You tell me if anybody out there knows why that is. But as it sits currently, the battery lasts a pretty good long time. It's not half bad. And again, in terms of size, 3200 milliamps, that's a significantly sized battery. So it's getting close to, in terms of battery class size, it's getting close to the battery life of like an Anytone ATD878UV or the 935 Golf. Although the 935 Golf does seem to last a little bit longer, but it's got a good healthy battery in it, so that is a good thing. So really, that's kind of about it on this radio. In terms of, is it good to go? Do I recommend it? Absolutely, hands down. Getting back to that $150 class in terms of radios. The competition this radio has are things like the Yaesu FT70, the Yaesu FT60. I'm trying to think of a couple other radios that are sort of in that class that are as good or worthy of consideration. There's actually not that many, to be honest with you. There are some radios out there there's actually radios out there that are a lot more expensive than this that don't even get close in terms of the features. But I would say the closest comparison would be with an FT60 maybe. And then it comes down to, well, is the receiver and is the quality of reception and the quality of transmission as good as an FT60? Because if you're looking at having $154, for instance, to spend, and you're kind of hung up between, do I do an FT60 or do I do one of these? Now the FT60, of course, gives you memory banks. It gives you a couple of cool things. It gives you one other adjustment in terms of a squelch ring at the top of the radio that I don't see on any HTs anymore, but there is a reason for that. That squelch ring likes to walk around a lot. But yeah, the FT60 has banks, but this is weather resistant. Yeah, the FT60, well, gosh, the FT60 maybe might sound a little better in terms of the speaker big deal. This thing is really, I got to be honest, it's hard for me to get the words out. But if I honestly had to make a recommendation right now, do I buy an FT60, a Yaesu FT60, or do I buy this? That would be a hard choice for me to make. I might actually lean towards this rather than the FT60. Because for the same price, you actually get more features here in terms of the weather resistance, the overall build quality, some of the actual functions, that TDR, the dual receive, because the FT60 is single line display. This gives you dual receive, dual watch. It gives you a lot of things, whereas all the FT60 can really offer at this point is a name and some memory banks. So that's why this one's up there at the front of the line, and that's why this one actually got selected recently over the FT60. Now, I didn't answer the question. Does it receive as well as the 60? It's damn close. It really is. I can't really tell a difference. My only thing is maybe this thing might be just a little, ever so too sensitive. You got to run the squelch levels a little bit higher than you might normally run it. I usually run squelch levels around 3. On this one, I tend to have to run it around 5 to keep it from just randomly picking up a thing or two here and there that I don't want it to pick up. But it may just be I may actually have some regional RF interference that's causing that, because when I'm mobile, it's not a problem at all. So I'm still playing around with that. But long story short, and yeah, it's been a long story. You know me, I do long ass videos. The Wouxun KG-UV9 Papa and UV9 Delta. Ringing endorsement for me. These radios are pretty badass. They are really genuinely very good radios. So if you're considering stepping up from a cheap Chinese radio into something more capable, if you've got if your budget is 150 to 175, I'm going to say this would probably be my #1 recommendation at this point. There's no digital modes, but hey, I don't really find digital modes to be particularly useful on any level anyway. But as an MCOM radios and outdoor radios and radios good in the woods, look no further than this one. So with that, I will bring it to a close, but following on, I am going to do a full output power and SWR test on this radio. I'm going to show some upgrade antenna options and some interesting things that I've discovered about one particular antenna for this radio. I'm going to go over useful feature or useful accessories. I've got a bunch of accessories to show on this. For instance, I didn't note whether this had a DC in port. It does not, but there is a battery eliminator kit available for this. So there will be a part 2 of this review where I'll talk about ways to enhance this and make it a better radio and make it work better for you. And then, of course, we'll do some operator series stuff on it, show you how to work the front panel in the field. So I'm going to go ahead and call it at this point. I want to thank you for watching and or listening. This is Scott in Southwest Visalia, California. Have a wonderful day.